I'm Connor Old and welcome back to another episode of Forgotten Oscar Films. And this week we're going to be looking at the 1978 class of movies with a movie that I've never really heard of, but a movie I really quite did enjoy. I'm talking about Paul Mazurski's An Unmarried Woman. So, if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is a look at the films that were nominated for Best Picture, starting with the year 1988 and working backwards. That means we must be on our, well, maybe I guess 11th episode here with the 1978 class of movies. And this was a really unique year. What I do normally is sort of look at the Oscars history, look at the other nominees, explain why I didn't choose some of the other nominees, and also explain sort of the history of the Oscars. So if you're an Oscar fan and you like this channel, this is definitely related. But also if you like some of my other series, something like a Masters of Controlled Chaos, you enjoy sort of my analysis part and my thoughts, I try to answer that, but I also try to answer sort of a general question of why has this maybe been forgotten? Why haven't people been talking about this as much? In 1978, this was sort of seen, at least by the Academy, as one of the 5 best movies, yet why was it not sort of as remembered as some people think? We're going to be exploring all those topics and those themes in this episode, starting off with sort of the Oscar history. So the 5 nominees, the first one of them was The Deer Hunter, which was the eventual Best Picture winner. This movie I had already seen before. It's sort of a quintessential, I think, in a lot of ways in terms of recommendations. And, of course, everything in terms of forgotten is my opinion. Some people may never have heard of The Deer Hunter, but for me, it was a movie that was on TV. It was seen as sort of one of the great 70s classics and sort of epics in a lot of ways, especially because it was Vietnam, very relevant at the time, seen as one of the best Vietnam War films. Michael Cimino was a very interesting director, especially how his career went afterwards, despite making this film as an all-star cast: Robert De Niro, Meryl Streep, Christopher Walken, John Cazale. Really just a notorious film all around. I think maybe by the average guy today, that's not sort of maybe a big film fan, just showing them this film, they may get some of it, but I remember seeing it the first time and being like, wow, this is kind of different than I expected, which I kind of appreciate now, but at the time it was very slow and very long, so maybe no one would hold up as well, and as some people think. But this is definitely an odd year for a Best Picture, because this is the late 70s, and I think this is the point where we're really transitioning into the 80s. We have movies like Superman and Grease, and these are the big movies of the year, yet they're not getting nominated for the Oscars. So that's something you want to keep in mind. Another nominee, which was its sort of Vietnam rival of the year for Best Picture, was Coming Home. I don't want to talk about Coming Home just because I may be talking about the director Hal Ashby in an upcoming Masters of Controlled Chaos. We'll see. That's the plan, at least, so I don't want to talk about that now. And then another nominee is Heaven Can Wait. So this is sort of a spiritual-esque movie sort of comedy, actual big hit of the summer, getting nominated, which we don't see that often today. But Warren Beatty actually co-directed this movie, I think, though he is uncredited, but stars in the movie, sort of developed it, very similar to Reds in a lot of ways. Reds was the movie after he made this, in terms of directing at least. It is notable that we already covered Warren Beatty on the Reds episode, so I didn't really want to cover having away too much aside from that. And then the final nominee is Midnight Express is the last nominee. So this is a film that actually had recommended to me a lot, but a film that I still don't think is talked about a lot. I think is maybe, not starring someone that you recognize, definitely not directed by someone you recognize, but actually we did talk about this director, Alan Parker, we talked about in the Mississippi Burning episode, because he did that film. So really, my only option, I think, when I saw it, was An Unmarried Woman. The last few episodes, I think, you definitely did maybe a little bit of a cheats movie that were kind of recognized, but this one is definitely one I've never heard of. It starred someone I've never heard of. It was written and directed by someone I never heard of. And as I was watching the movie, I was like, okay, yeah. And I looked up Paul Mazurski's filmography. I was like, okay, I've heard of Harry and Tonto and Moscow and the Hudson. I didn't recognize that was him, that he's the guy. But he's very successful in the 70s. So this was definitely a film that was kind of the film that I needed to see. And I was well surprised. But this was a film that its nominee for Best Picture was its sort of win, because it was nominated only 3 times for this, Best Lead Actress and Best Writing for Paul Mazursky. But really this was the year of the Vietnam War movie. The big 2 sort of potential winners going into the night, because there wasn't sort of a set winner, was The Deer Hunter and Coming Home, both sort of Vietnam War movies that, similar to something like The Best Years of Our Lives in post-war and for World War II, this is a film that really tapped into the mindset of the States post-Vietnam War. The Vietnam War ended in 75. This movie came out in both these movies came out in 78, with something like Apocalypse Now coming out in '79, and then Platoon in early '80s. So really this was a time of the Vietnam War movie that really dominated the Oscars in a lot of ways. And both these films were both the Vietnam War movies because I think they tapped into the sort of central idea that concretely sort of developed throughout the sort of Vietnam War movies, is that this war was kind of maybe a mistake, and very different from something like John Wayne's Green Berets, which looking back at it was released in 1968, was almost a propaganda piece for the Vietnam War. This one is very much more cynical. Both these movies maybe coming home a little bit more in terms of its the ill-advised nature of it, and sort of how people were coming back after the war, and you know, they were coming back different people, or they weren't coming back because they died. So you have both those aspects. It was an interesting year for that because I think The Deer Hunter is a little bit more recognized than Coming Home, but maybe that's because it won Best Picture. Hard to say, but this was also sort of known for Jane Fonda coming out and saying, you know, actually our movie won Best Picture. We were the real winners. She was sort of a political actress at the time, really championed this film, and sort of brought that sort of real life aspects to the film, which drew some people away, but also attracted others. But that's sort of an interesting little tidbit. But now transitioning into my thoughts. So I actually really enjoyed this movie. This is a film that, you know, we've been on a really great streak here for forgotten Oscar films. I really enjoyed All That Jazz. I loved Ordinary People. Loved Tender Mercies. And this one is maybe above all that elk. It's definitely up there for one of my favorites of the series so far. Maybe because we're getting to the '70s, which is a little bit more of one of my favorite movie film decades. Maybe that's the reason, but this is definitely a film that I think is different than all those films because, if you don't know, it's kind of a romantic comedy or sort of an adult drama in a lot of ways, which is similar to some of the other ones. But this film, if you don't know, is about a woman who was recently divorced by her husband, who left her for a younger woman, who then sort of has to try to find her way in her life and try to find her own identity. And that's what I really enjoyed about the film, is that this is a really complex character, and I think Jill Clayburgh, somehow I really haven't seen a lot of her movies at all, brings a unique sort of aspect to this and brings more. It's the definition of an actor bringing more to the character, which I really appreciated. It's a situation where there's a great script here with Paul Mazursky. There's some great dialogues, great some scenes selections and setting selections, but there's really a complex character in the central character of Erica. And it's definitely a feminist film, but it's not sort of the feminist films where there's just a strong female character and they have no faults and they're kind of one-sided. And I kind of find that a little bit boring. It's sort of that interesting aspect of the character is that they're female. But I think in this one, it's actually a complex character that also happens to be female. She's a person who has sort of charming aspects to her, but she also makes mistakes. She's not a perfect person. So sometimes her ego gets in the way, but she still has some really other qualities that, you know, her love for her child, for example, is really sort of you gravitate towards, very attractive as a character, and it's someone that Jill Clayburgh really understands and brings sort of a unique honesty that I appreciated. But this film is more than just that. I think there's a real technical expertise and craft for this film. You know, there's scenes that are blocked very uniquely that I really appreciated in terms of just how, you know, really the art of blocking has really been lost nowadays due to things like editing so much easier. You can move the camera so much easier. So what they're able to do here, just unique settings, how they Erica and Martin sort of meet during running, but then there's also scenes between Erica and Saul where they're moving the camera in the streets of New York and they sort of pan aside, now they're sort of in this little area, or in the paint studio where there's a great two-shot. You know, there's some really great blocking that are able to not cut in between different things, but still get the emotions and convey the scene across effectively. And then there's also really great editing in this film I appreciated, because this sort of has a light pace, light on its feet, kind of graceful pace, going from one scene to the next. Now that can seem easy, but it's really hard to do, to pull off with such ease, it seems like, because it's almost like your hand flowing through, sort of putting it through water. It's just so easy how scene transitions from one to the next that I really appreciated. And overall, I really, really enjoyed this movie. But why hasn't sort of it been forgotten? Well, I think availability is a huge one. You can barely find it on DVD. They haven't reissued it. It's not on Blu-ray, at least where I live. So it's really hard to find that way. So how do you recommend? So you watch this movie. Where do I see it? You know, it's kind of hard to do. Plus, this kind of movie, this genre, hasn't been as prevalent. You know, the rom-coms in general haven't been sort of super prevalent because Nowadays, even the ones in theaters, something like Long Shot or Isn't It Romantic, haven't been doing that well because of sort of the die down of the movie star and the rise of intellectual property. But then we see some of the rom-coms on Netflix do really well. Set It Up, To All the Boys I've Loved Before. So there's that, but then sort of the older genre, someone like Nancy Meyers makes those movies, but she's really the only one left, and it's hard for her to get those made because they're like $80 million and they pay the stars, and what's your sort of guarantee that they're going to make money back? The stars? It's kind of hard. It's a genre that's definitely dying, and I don't think it should, because it's really a fantastic genre, and I think it can explore a lot of different unique sort of female characters for a lot of actors who are still not getting the lead roles, but still maybe deserve them. But yeah, I really enjoyed this movie. That's about it, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode, and until next time, stay tuned.